The theme of Thor the Dark World is one of the most memorable themes in the Marvel universe for me personally. It's not only a matter of memorable melodies though, I think there's more at play that makes this song sound so interesting and never boring to listen to. I wanted to understand what the secrets of this Brian Tyler composition are, so I decided to rewrite it by ear, and in today's tutorial I'm gonna show you guys what I learned. Coming up. Hey, what's up friend? This is Alex, and as usual I'm here to help you demystify orchestral music. If whenever you listen to a soundtrack, you feel down because you feel as if you will never have the talent or skill or ear to write something that sounds as awesome, you came to the right place because I'm here to prove you wrong and show you how you can do the exact same thing and write some amazing music even if you're not talented. Today we're gonna analyze Brian Tyler's music to understand a bit of how he creates movement and makes things sound awesome in his Thor the Dark World score. And if you're new here, you might want to check out the rest of this channel because there's, right now, I'm in 100 tutorials about orchestral music that can open your eyes, your ears, and your mind and set you to a path of becoming an incredible composer. At least that's my hope for this channel. Anyway, let's get into the tutorial. This song is never tiring to listen to for some reason, and naturally, because I'm a composer as well, I was curious about the arrangement techniques that were implied into making this song sound so enticing. So what I did is I rewrote it entirely by ear, because I cannot read sheet music and I don't know music theory, so that's the way in which I need to do it. And this is an exercise I recommended in my video, how to avoid getting stuck. So in this case, this is just an exercise. It's not really an arrangement like my Cuphead Western orchestral arrangement, but it's something where I took the original and rewrite it as I heard it, just to notice and internalize all the knowledge from the original song in terms of arranging structure. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're not going to talk about music theory because I don't know anything about that. Although I make loads of orchestral music tutorials, I always speak from the place of writing by ear and arranging techniques and orchestration, but never about, theory. All I can say about theory is that this first part of the song is in D melodic minor scale, which is very interesting scale. And then it modulates here, I think, to C minor, I think. And that it might have other modulations as well. Modulation is where you change the scale to something else by using either some chords that are in common between the two scales, they're called pivot chords, or in other ways that I, right now, don't understand. If you want to learn more about modulations, though, I watched a video about it just as a curious thing from 8-Bit Music Theory, where he took the music of Octopath Traveler and showed many examples of modulations and how they triggered the modulations there. So definitely check out 8 Music Theory if you want to learn 8-Bit Music Theory if you want to learn about music theory. Today we're going to talk about orchestration in this song. The big idea, I think, here is the fact that Brian Tyler tried to write this motifs like da 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 da, like very simple, It follows certain patterns. It doesn't move around so much, but he executes this whole easy to follow arrangement with such style and such movement that it never gets boring. That's the thing I noticed. So today we're gonna look at how he creates the movement in every single part, except for this final part, which I'm not a huge fan of, but the first few parts so great, and let's check them out. If you don't want to get lost as you watch this tutorial, you can get the stems, like the audio files of each separated instrument, down below in the description for free. Usually I share the stems of every song I publish on YouTube, but only on Patreon for those who support me. So if you want to check out the stems of all my other songs, you can get those on Patreon. But if you want to check out these ones of this Thor, the Dark World song, link down below, you can get them for free from there. Now, without further ado, let's analyze this first part. So, the first part we're gonna analyze is, of course, the intro, and it sounds like this. So there's a few things to say. First, this intro, the purpose is to create a sense of promise and build up the energy kind of. And Brian Tyler does that with the percussive rhythms and the the string staccatos. But if we only hear the percussion and the staccatos, I mean, it's okay, but you miss the whole energy buildup, which is brought by the rising French horn and the rising choir. So that's something you notice here. That thing there is what I would call a slow riser. It's like, you know, I think da, something like that. It's like very slow. Da, 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 right? And when you have a rising tone like that, and this is a very stupid way to explain it, but really when you have a rising tone of any kind, that creates a bit of anticipation. It feels like, oh, something is evolving, something is about to happen. And that's what's happening with this very simplistic, you know, sustain pattern. Now, there's three things to say about this intro, other than, you know, that we have a brass and choir doing that. By the way, for the choir, I'm using Metropolis Arc 1 and Oceania. For the brass, I'm using Metropolis Arc 1 and Synth Brass from Edayo. For the strings, Metropolis Arc 1 and Fluid Shorts. And for the percussion, quite a few library like Edayo Epic Toms, Epic Dhols, the snare from Rhapsody Orchestral Percussion, and some of them damage a bit. But yeah, so the first thing we notice is that rising tone in the French horn and in the choir as well. And the cool thing is, you know, well, I'm going to talk about that in a few seconds. But basically, yeah, we have that rising tone. And we also have a pattern which is being played by double basses, tubas, and French horns. So as for pattern, I mean this one. Quite simple pattern, but it's made cool by the fact that it has this variation. You know, it's like A, G, F, E. You know, and we have that on double basses. We have that on tuba, so that brings a lot of the low end. But then we also have that on French horn. Now, on French horn, the pattern keeps on rising in terms of tone once again. So we like these rising tones is very interesting in this intro. So it starts from octave 3, then it goes to octave 4, and then octave 5. You know, so that's one thing. And then underneath we have, you know, rather on top of that, we have this rhythmic pattern from the violas. The cool thing about this rhythmic pattern is first, it's playing subdivisions in between the rhythms of our pattern. I used to call these notes syncopated notes, but they're actually called subdivisions. So whenever I refer to syncopated notes in my previous tutorials, no, they are subdivisions. That's not the right term, and I'm sorry for using the wrong term. Basically, these are, you know, smaller notes or faster notes in between the main rhythms. Now, the cool thing that you see in these subdivisions is that they also follow the pattern. They bring the rhythm because we have these velocity changes, and you know, using subdivisions in between one big rhythm that creates, you know, a more interesting rhythm. And the other thing they do is in the variation, they do, you know, this like 12 notes, you know, 6 12th notes, and that's different from, you know, doing 4 notes. So you have a variation in this subdivided pattern as well. And on top of that, we have the violins that keep rising just like the French horn. So it's either instruments that are playing the pattern or instruments that are rising in tone, but they're all following kind of the same rhythm, you know, and that's pretty cool. So they all feel as part of a whole, but so every instrument is doing its own thing. So it's creating movement like that. The last thing you notice is this. There's a few things happening here. Let me isolate the most important aspects of this part. So before the transition, or rather in the transition, there's a few sounds that trigger. The first is a woodwind run. The second is a French horn scoop. And the third is a percussion roll. Now, those don't seem so interesting, right? But for example, and this is something I mentioned in the tutorials as well. Say, for example, we remove the cymbal. Wow, it sounds way more close now. So using cymbals and gongs for transitions really helps into opening things up. So it leads us to a new place and it's like, whoom, you know, super huge. Second thing, the brass scoop like that and the woodwind run. These are things I mentioned in the epic brass tutorials and realistic woodwinds tutorials. When you do these sort of sounds, it's like you're playing a scale very fast, you know, and in this case, it's just alternating like that, but this is really a scale. And the scoop is going from one note to the equivalent of that note on a higher octave, but it has this, so it plays more than just, I don't know how they do that, but it plays more than just, you know, wait, what note am I playing here? I don't even remember. So this goes from A4 to A5, and in the between, it's also like, there is this sort of tone that, you know, connects the two, so it's sort of like a riser once again. So using scoops and woodwind runs for transitions is so great. You just give that extra push. If we didn't have that, I removed this and I removed the scoop. Maybe I have an example of that here, probably. It'll be weird. It's like, yeah, it feels okay because it's the same song, but it's not as powerful as having this. And this seems very simple. It sounds like it's not the groundbreaking trick to get the Brian Tyler sound, and that's not how you should think. The idea behind getting a professional sound, as I mentioned in many other of my tutorials, is learning all these different tricks and then implementing them all in your songs. Of course, this song also sounds amazing because of the chord progressions and the melodies that Brian Tyler did. Now, we're going to talk about the melody now, because this is what comes up in this part, the B part now. The melodies in Thor, The Dark World, as well as the chord progressions, are my favorite part of this song. Now, the melodies themselves are quite simple, and they're often used as leitmotifs, if that's the way you say the word, in the soundtrack itself. If you really pay attention to it very closely, you're going to notice, oh wow, he's playing that melody again. Now, one of the leading melodies is this one. So that melody there is quite recognizable because of one reason that I mentioned in my tutorial, 2 ways to make melodies stand out in any arrangement. If we analyze it, it's on French horn, choir, and trumpets, and it sounds like this. Now, these instruments, the French horn, the melody, and the trumpets, are the ones that in this part of the arrangement reach the highest timbre. As I mentioned in that tutorial, usually those instruments on the highest timbre are the ones that are the most noticeable for us. Instead, as I mentioned in my how to write great melodies and counter melodies tutorial, a good exercise to do to make melodies that are amazing, that sound great, and they're easy to work with, is to follow certain patterns. So if, for example, we analyze the melody, let's check it out on the French horns and trumpets. This is what we notice. Sorry, there's so many voices, it's so freaking hard to find the right one. Okay, this is the melody. Now, in the French horns, first it's layered on 2 octaves, And this is one thing I recommend. If you want to make a melody stand out, you can layer it, like that. Especially like French horn, they sound amazing on the octave 5, octave 4. So you can, layer it like that. Like when you do that, though, you should take into account that you are actually multiplying the number of French horn. In this case, this is the French horn A9 patch from Metropolis arc, and A9 in Metropolis arc means that this is like 9 horns, 9 French horn. So whenever I play a note, this is the sound of 9 French horns. If I play 2 notes, it's now 18 French horns. If I play 3, it's like 9 multiplied by 3, and it's like 27. It's like crazy. I don't know of an orchestration that has 27 French horns. That can kind of destroy the balance in your song. So if you have to play chords, for example, here I'm just doubling, it's like 18 French horns. It's still crazy, but it's not 27. So it doesn't destroy the balance so much. But if I had to play chords, for example, triads with my French horns, I will use patches with less French horns. Like this one from Arc is the A3, it has 3 French horns. And indeed, I'm playing triads, and these are now 9 French horns playing instead of 27. That seems trivial, and I thought it was, but really that can make or break the contrast or balance in your track. So that's not very good. Now, I just noticed that this melody on French horn also has a counter melody. We're going to talk about that now. But if you analyze the melody, it comes in, like there's 2 parts here, like a ba 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 bum, ba 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 ba. The only difference in between these 2, versions of this melody is this note, the C that goes to A, The rest follows the same rhythm, the same notes, right? So that's a melody like this that has a variation that is so simple and doesn't take it to a whole entirely different place, is easy to remember, can be used throughout a score very effectively with people remembering it very easily. Now, to make this a bit less cheesy, a bit less, simple, what Brian Tyler did is he harmonized it quite a bit. So you have this counter melody down here, which is doing, so it's harmonizing the melody. And that creates very interesting colors. There's interesting colors all throughout the first part of the song or throughout the whole score already, thanks to the keys he picked. I told you before, he picked a D minor melodic scale. I think that's the one he used in this track. And the D minor melodic is like a scale that starts like a D major and it ends like a D minor. It's very weird. I don't understand that entirely. But yeah, so that's, when he harmonized this with that scale, it's just amazing. Now, another thing I noticed is that he also layered the trumpets on a higher octave. This is, as I told you before, 27 horns, no go. But if you want to take this on a higher octave, you can put it on trumpets, for example. That's very cool. And trumpets have a much brighter timbre than French horns. So if you have to go so high, it's a good idea to use trumpets. And Brian Tyler did quite a bit in this soundtrack. Also, another thing you notice in the melody is that he is using marcato notes, alternating them with sustains. We have like this. This, you see, it ended after a while because this is a marcato note. And as I mentioned in my tutorial about about the importance of using marcatos, whenever you use marcatos on something, it's going to stand out way more because it's going to be played way more powerfully than a sustain. So for melodies, it's a good idea to use marcato. And that's what's happening here for the French horn and the trumpets and the counter melody. We also have that on the choir. This melody is layered with women choir. As I showed you before, it's gone for some reason. Okay. So we have ba 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 on female choir, and then we have the harmonized version, the counter melody. And then this is also copy and pasted in the man choir. So he pretty much took the melody, put it on female choir, man choir, put the counter melody in the man choir and female choir as well. And now it has that beautiful color where it's not only one melody, but also the counter melody. And in between those, just like, I don't know, harmonies going on. And it's just beautiful. But that's not the only thing we have in terms of harmonies. So, but that's already a way in which you can build a melody and bring movement to the melody itself. Use marcato, make sure the melody is on the highest instrument, layer your melody to give it a more color, and do some counter melody harmonizations. But underneath that, there's an entire world. So let's check out. I'm gonna remove the instruments that are playing the melody. So I said there were the trumpets, the French horns, here. Sorry, this orchestration is so thick with stuff that it's actually pretty tough to remember exactly where everything was. So when we remove all the melodic stuff, it sounds like this. I just noticed we have a bit of melody in the strings also. Yeah. There's a violin doing the melody as well. So again, he just wanted to enforce the melody. But another thing you notice that is responsible for a lot of the movement in this part is the string spiccatos. Now, when people write string spiccatos, they tend to use a chord, like they do at infinity, and it sounds like crap because that's not realistic. It's super repetitive. It's not fun. Let's check out what Brian Tyler is doing here instead. So surely you notice that, it has a certain repetitivity to it, but it's also, quite interesting and colorful. Now, I forgot about this. You have this voice of viola doing this, and then you have a voice of violins here that is enforcing these A notes. And so the cool thing about this pattern, these ostinato, is that it is a pattern, but it changes the notes sometimes, because what it's doing is it's following the chord progression in this bit. I'm gonna play it on piano now, so check out what happens. Sorry, I need to enable the piano. So many crazy things happening here. Okay. They are kind of like, it changes, like some of the notes change very, simply, or they don't do crazy jumps, but they change slightly, because if you put together the sound, like whenever you play a note like this, right, a spiccato, you have a bit of that tone, a bit of that, here, this A note. You have a bit of that A note left in the tail of the sound. So if you have a spiccato or ostinato like this, which is very, fast, you have many different, tail, like out of all the notes, and the sound of all those tails, the leftover tones of all those tails that fade away very quickly, builds harmonies in between. So what this is just this chord progression played with this ostinato pattern. Now the ostinato pattern has movement, because we change note and everything, and you play with rhythms. When you do sort of things like this sort of arpeggi, you create movement, but you also create harmonies. So this is an interesting way in which you can write a chord progression. So that's what it did, and it sounds energetic because it's like short notes, and it has that sort of like, velocities and violin accents, and again, underneath this melody, it sounds amazing. If I were to remove that, now it's a bit empty and it's not that energetic anymore. So another thing he did in terms of chord progressions is he gave a bit of enforcement to the melody itself. So let's check out what's happening in the French horn patch here. This was a bit tricky to write, and it doesn't sound like this in the original. The original sounds way better because he recorded that with a real orchestra, had way more freedom, and I'm not so great at writing what he did there. But what is happening here, we're playing triads, and they rise and they fall in terms of dynamic. They have this extra oomph, extra push that comes in when the melody rests. So he's playing those chord progressions, but he's also, let me isolate this. As you see, some voices move independently, like this F note here, like gives an extra sharpness to this build-up. And then when this is over, it goes down, and here is the part where the melody, plays again. So if you just check out the melody here, you're gonna notice what I mean. Yeah. Melody rests, build up. So whenever, this note in the melody lands, you have these staccatos here, and then when the melody rests, you have this build up, it gets higher. And that's way more noticeable in the original rather than in my rendition of it. I think we also have some bass notes on the bass trombone, but they don't create movement. They just do that. Like, there's this bass, and then it rises as the melody rests. Once again, it's like same concept as in our French horn. Now, the last thing, most important thing in this part is the tutti at the end. So you have the melody repeating, and then you have the melody variating, and then it doesn't end with a rest, but it ends like this. This is one of my favorite things that Brian Tyler did in this specific soundtrack, this specific track of the soundtrack. There's these moments where everything comes together. So this is quite chill, it sounds big, but it's like sustained melodies and everything, it's not that powerful. And then this part comes and, slaps you in the face. But let's see what he's actually doing in this bit. This is what you would call a tutti, where everything plays the same thing, and it just creates this massive sound if it is preceded by something that is more relaxed. If all the track was like loud and stuff, this wouldn't, in contrast, sound that, that crazy. So another thing you can do to create movement in your track is to have those dynamic changes. As I showed you before, melody rests and the brass, chords come up. That's movement. But another thing is, okay, having a part that is quiet and then ending it with a very powerful transition, or having a super powerful part and doing a calm transition. So movement in the sense of change. And keeping that going on in the song, especially before transitions, before moving to a new part, that's the best. And that's what Brian Tyler does in this song. Let's check out what those tuttis are doing though. What is going on here is that everything is going to the same articulation, staccato. Let's check out though what these staccatos exactly are. Because the reason why this tutti sounds so awesome might not be that much noticeable at first glance. But if you listen to it very carefully, you're gonna notice there's something interesting going on in the French horn and in the choir. Let's check them out. Actually, it's in the choir itself, the female choir. So if you check out the female choir staccato, in this part, you have two voices. There's this A, and then B. So it's, again, rising tone. But you also have this da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, you know. Where is it? This one. And it ends on this super, very minor interval. And it creates an incredible tension. But the fact that you move, from A5 to F, this da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, this would be considered, I don't know, a counter melody maybe. And having that in between your tutti creates a bit of movement there. If we left the tutti without the movement, they would sound something like this. And that's not very effective. So, what it does here, like that da-da-da-dum, I think he does that as well somewhere in the brass. I don't remember exactly where. On the French ones. And yeah, if he didn't have that going on, it wouldn't sound this amazing. The other reason why this sounds amazing is check out the frequency spectrum of this thing, It's freaking full. And this is something I talk about in many of my tutorials, especially the #1 mixing rule to get your tracks to sound professional is if you want something to sound full as hell and powerful as hell, you should have a frequency spectrum that is super thick. But that's not about movement. It's just something that you should keep in mind. So he's playing these staccatos on double basses, on tubas, on bass trombone, French horn, choir, and he's distributing them throughout the space, the frequency spectrum. But he also has that parabam, and those rising tones as well. So that's another way in which you create a movement. Now, let's see how this track proceeds. This is the part where you have another melody coming in, which is another leitmotif in the track, and which follows a certain pattern, but it has a modulation in the middle. And it sounds like this. So if you've been paying attention to this tutorial, you might have noticed that some things that are happening here follow the techniques I explained to you before. Again, the melody is in the higher octave and everything. But the cool aspect about the melody in this bit is that, it has that pattern and variation, where you have the minimal change in the second phrasing of the melody. But then, after the second phrasing of the melody, it's as if it gets higher or something. And it does. This is what I mentioned before as modulation. In this bit, the song goes from one key to the other, and all the notes get sort of like uplifted because of that. It's like changing the colors entirely of your song in an instant like that. Now, usually you can hear that maybe in pop music during the final chorus, where they repeat the chorus and then they do the modulation, repeat it once again on a higher octave. Or higher, tones, not octave, but higher tone, sorry. This can be done in orchestral music as well. But I'm not entirely sure right now how to trigger this effectively. So I will probably make another tutorial on modulations once I figure them out more. I just know that's what Brian Tyler is doing here. Another good example of modulation is a track from Two Steps from Hell. It's called Amaria. In the second part of Amaria, there is a certain crescendo that rises and then modulates and falls with the different key. And it's freaking amazing. And I'm still not sure how he triggered that, like Thomas Bergerson in that song. But modulation is so powerful. It's such a powerful way to make, to bring movement. Another thing you might notice is that we have a tutti once again here. Sorry. And again, it's like pa-pa-pa-pam, pa-pa-pa-pam, pa-pa, so it's like rising tone. The other thing you notice other than the rising tone in this tutti is that we sort of have a crescendo, sustained crescendo in our brass. This French one. These sort of things are very important to use. Try to not only use, sustain or not only use staccato. Try to blend in many different articulations. And if you want to learn more about what articulation to use where, I made a tutorial about them. I think it's called Articulations Explained. I'm going to link it down below anyhow. But if we had this without the crescendo, it will still sound okay, but it wouldn't have that extra. So you should summon as many articulations and as much movement as possible. I think that's also what's going on in the choir. There's some sustains that are, increasing in terms of dynamics. And if you don't know what this curve is, then my man or my woman, you should actually check out MIDI control commands. This curve here, many people ask me about it. I'm like, this is the fundamental of knowledge you need to have to write orchestral music that sounds good. Without these curves, you won't be able to change the intensity of the playing or the singing of sustained notes. If I play da 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 da, that's intensity changing, right? That's like drawing a curve that rises and falls and rises, And this is achieved with modulation wheel, not with volume. If you do a volume automation like this, you're not gonna change the tone. It's gonna be like da 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 da. We got far or close and change the volume, but the intensity stays the same. If you want something to sound realistic, you need to give it intensity changes so that by using the mod wheel, it's gonna get softer and harder, and that can lead you to create those interesting sort of like build-ups of energy and stuff like that, like it's happening in the choir in this bit. Like, that's very important. Seems like it's not, it is. It's the foundation of movement. So that's one thing I should have mentioned from the get-go of this video. I just suppose that if you watch my tutorials, you know what that is because I use those things all the time. Anyway, let's analyze a bit more of this part. I just wanted to point out the main things. But one thing I should totally mention about this part is about the melody again. Before the modulation or before the repetition of the melody here, what happens is that the instruments playing the melody change a bit. Here we have the melody on French horn, and that's okay. But here, the melody now moves to, like it stays on French horn, but it also moves to bass trombone and female choir. Like there's one voice of female choir doing one thing, but there's the other voice playing that melody on a super high octave, and then the bass trombone playing that melody on a lower octave like that. And, the idea of taking a melody and changing the instruments or adding instruments that play that melody is pretty powerful in any sort of like orchestral score. That's something I discovered after rewriting a track by Hans Zimmer, the Pirates of the Caribbean track, which I spent, 40, 50 hours on, and it sounds very close to the original. In doing that one, I discovered the secret of like, hey, you can actually repeat a melody and it will sound interesting if you just change the instruments that are playing that melody, And I did that on my Terrace theme cover, on my Cuphead cover, and that's the reason why those tracks sound interesting, even though they're repeating the same concept over and over. Also, there's some things that change, obviously. For example, in the background, here the choir does this. And then in the repetition, it does this. So more voice got added, the rhythm changes quite a bit. I don't remember exactly if something is happening in the strings though. Oh yeah, in the strings here we have this. And that's okay. But then in that repeated, in that repetition with the modulation, we have, I think, a cello that is playing, no, sorry, it's a viola that is playing the notes that the choir are playing as well. So this guy. So that's da 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 da. That's a new part that came here. And the last thing, which I think is the coolest part of this bit of the song, is this. Again, Brian Tyler, doing interesting colors and, making us admire his music by using these interesting staccatos. Now, this staccato is very repetitive, to be frank, but the way it ends promises, that something is about to change. That there, like, since it's so repetitive until this point, when you hear that sort of like change there, you're like, okay, something is happening. Rather, you feel it. It's not like you rationalize all of this. You just hear it, and your ears rationalize it that way. You feel variation, and you expect change. And indeed, after that, you have that. Now, once again, if we, paid attention to this, we would notice these are actually chords again. And in here, indeed, he changes a few notes to change the chord, and then he does that. And also, by using staccatos underneath our sustain elements, he creates more rhythm, which creates more energy, which creates movement. And that's very beautiful. Think of ostinatos not only as a way to do or to do the classical trailer ostinatos, which are fine, but that's not the only way in which you can use them. Think of ostinatos as a way of leading the track forwards. You can use them as risers, as I did in my Cuphead cover, or you can use them as a way to build energy and everything. And we also have other ostinatos in the strings for sure, but that's not the scope of this tutorial. But what I should say about these ostinatos is that if you before I mentioned that you have to use the modulation wheel to create movement and dynamics, and that's true for sustain stuff. For rhythmic stuff, dynamics won't matter as much, but you have to play with the velocities, which is what I did here. If I were to put the velocities at the same level on the cellos, it sounds like crap compared to this. So very important to play with velocities if you want to create some interesting rhythms. And that's what's happening in this C part. As for the D part, this is my absolute favorite thing I heard from Brian Tyler. Check this out. That passage right there blew me away when I heard it at the cinema, when I watched Thor: The Dark World, and this, staccato here stood in my head for years. And it's not, I don't know, like, it's so weird. It's like he's playing this sort of scales, like, is, I cannot really explain this one, really, guys. It's so weird, but also not that much crazy. These notes all belong to this scale. He's playing this pattern, but the cool thing is that he has these sort of variations, So it's not only, I don't know, but it's very interesting, and it brings a lot of color, a lot of energy, as we mentioned before. If we had that part going on without the spiccatos, which is played on, I think, violins on a higher octave and violas on a lower octave, this part would sound a bit scarcer. I mean, it sounds okay, it sounds awesome because the choir is freaking bananas, but with the spiccato, it just gets a whole different vibe, or rather a whole different movement that it didn't have before. The other thing I love to death about this is the bass. And this is very noticeable in certain parts more than others, but check out what the bass is doing. This is bananas, guys. Like, I'm not really sure, like, it might sound not that much mind-blowing to you, but you have to understand, this brings a lot of color to the track because the bass is one of the most determining parts. In your orchestration, in your chord progression, you can give a whole different sense or different vibe to a chord progression if you change the root notes of it or the bass notes of it. And in this case, he's not doing da, 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 but you had da, 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 like this sort of movements here. It sounds as if he's playing melodies with the bass. And this is something I see or hear in John Williams' music as well. The way in which he moves the bass around is so beautiful. Now, what you notice is that he's doing these sort of notes here, but he's also doing them on cello, and I think he's doing them on tubas as well. So it's not as if he's doing different notes and counter melodies in between bass instruments. That's something I would never recommend, really, because it creates a bit of mud. Although he's doing a bit of that maybe in the bass trombone. But when he plays like this harmonizing counter melodies in the bass, he's doing those on higher octaves. I don't remember exactly the part where that happens. Oh yeah, here, the ba, 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 that melody there is not exactly what the bass is doing. It's playing other stuff that the French horn are playing, and that is actually a layer to the French horn, so I shouldn't have mentioned that. But the bass line itself moves around so much, and the cool thing is that, you know, you have these note changes, especially here. You know, in this part, he really wanted the bass to stand out. So what he did is he played marcatos and staccatos, you know. So this, you know, azure notes. Another thing you notice here is the tremolo. Tremolo is an interesting articulation to use to create more movement, and he uses it subtly throughout the track, but especially in these sort of passages here. And yeah, it's just, it's better than a sustain. Now, I'm gonna show you what this part would have sounded like if we had a bass that wasn't as rich. So I'm gonna play the whole thing with a crappy bass. Let's go. I mean, it still sounds pretty good, but this is a whole different thing, guys. And basically what he's doing is when the melodies and the chords are stable, he's moving the bass around. Or when the chords and melodies are getting higher, like here, like you have the melody da 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 da, that thing going on in the choir and everything. Sorry, here. Damn, it's here. Jesus. It gets super high, but then you have the bass that gets higher as well. You just have this, I don't know, it's so great as a movement. It just brings everything so much higher. And then when the things are stable, like in this part, have da 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 underneath, so it's not entirely stable because you feel, oh, the foundation of the track are moving around, so you feel, ooh, something is changing, there's some movement here, you know, I'm not entirely stable. And that also happens here, I think. Like here, da da, that's a, you know, very long sustained note, and that is stable. But if we have the bass that plays da 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 like it does here, you're like, oh, it's jumping around, what's happening? So that really, I'm not entirely sure the techniques he used in terms of music theory to create that sort of melodies in the bass line that don't clash so much with the chord progressions. What I would do is, if I wanted to write something like this, is just experiment until I get it right. But if you guys know about some techniques to write great bass lines like that, please inform me. Another thing I think would help with learning to write bass lines like that is actually play some bass guitar. You know, because that, if you play bass guitar, you start to get bored with the usual bass lines. So you start to think, how can I complement the arrangement more? You know, and another and another musician that I recommend to listen to for these sort of things is Muse. The song, for example, The Globalist by Muse. There's a second part in that song which is like orchestral rock and has these bass lines which are out of this world, in my opinion. So by listening and getting exposed to those sort of sounds and really paying attention to the bass in the music with great bass, you will notice so many, things that can just bring your track forwards. But anyway, I'm a huge bass nerd and I spoke too much about this point, and we should have moved on to something else. So let's mention another great thing about this part. Another cool aspect in terms of movement in this bit is the tutti at the end. What is exactly happening in this tutti though? Let's check it out. There's more like, it's sort of like two things happening really. There's these instruments, let me remove this and the percussion. You have the bass trombone, the French horn, and everything, choir doing this chords. The reason why these chords sound amazing is that, as you noticed, they have sort of like an edge at the beginning of bum. That's movement brought by the fact that they, like this sort of chords here, they start with staccato notes, So that's what's happening. Here in French, in tubas, I have a staccato note and a crescendo. Same thing I have in the French horn, bass trombone, and trumpet. And also the fact that I'm using trumpets on such high octave, again, you might underestimate the how they sound. When taken alone, trumpets sound freaking annoying. No offense to trumpet players. But if you add them on top of a brass section, on top of a whole orchestration like that, they give a brightness that can only be accomplished with them. And they blend together well with the choir, for example, but they're actually trumpets. And when you hear it with the whole orchestra, you just have that, bright sound. So maybe you've been asking yourself, what are you doing for the choir to make it sound so amazing? And maybe the reason that it sounds so bright and amazing is that it's layered with the trumpets. So this ostinato here, this crescendo here sounds amazing because, again, the frequency spectrum, the fact it has trumpets, on top of that, it goes super bright, and it has that. It starts with that staccato note on every single instrument, and then it rises in terms of dynamics, or it rises because I'm using the crescendo articulation. But the other cool thing is this. This is just a cello that is playing in that crescendo there. And here, as you see, Brian Tyler is not doing a G note, whatever, but he's actually moving the cello around. Why? Because of the same reasons I mentioned before in the bass lines. Everything is stable, everything is, sustained and everything like that. But we have this voice that is going places, going high and low, going high and low. And they're like, wow, where is it going? It feels like it wants to move somewhere. And that's what you want to have if you want to create that sense of movement again. And also, other than that, we also have a percussive role here. This really helps. And also this, cymbal and gong, you hear them throughout the song. And I haven't talked about them so much, but they create this sense of hugeness. As this ends, the D part comes in with a sense of wideness brought by the cymbals. If I were to remove the cymbals, where did that hugeness go, Well, it went away with the cymbals. The reason why it comes in with the cymbals is explained with frequencies. You see how high they are. High frequencies tend to make things sound open. So that's why this super short burst of high frequencies in any song will trigger a sense of hugeness. That's why trader music uses trader hits, because they bring that high end. That's why, risers make the track, make electronic music tracks sound more open, because they tend to have loads of high frequencies. And that's why I don't recommend to use so many high frequencies all the time. You want to have a sense of fullness as you bring the cymbals in. But if I had those high frequencies going on all the time, when the cymbals came in, they wouldn't stand out, because we would have had information here anyhow in the rest of the track. So, playing with that is very efficient. Try to, preserve a bit of the high frequencies in your track for your percussion, preserve a bit of low frequencies for the percussion as well. And in the percussion, it's good to play patterns, as Brian Tyler does for the whole, for most of the song. But you'll notice if you analyze the percussion in the stems that you can download down below for free, you'll notice that before the transitions, he does these sort of rolls, which are very different from what the percussion were doing in other bits. So that too is very important, but percussion deserves a tutorial on its own. But yeah, these are the things I noticed. And in this part, for me, the part that comes after this, this build-up is not that much interesting. It's like a recap, pretty much. And again, I wrote this very badly. It sounds way better in the original, but it's da 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 da. That is a leitmotif of another song in this soundtrack, which is very amazing. So this was the credits theme, as well as the main theme of the film. So the idea of presenting many leitmotifs makes sense, and that's what he's doing here. And in the credits version, you have this break in the percussion, which sounds way better in the original. But yeah, that's another example of movement, creating something that people didn't expect, or something that breaks what we have. And this silence is a good example of that. And then it comes back in with another symbol. It's like it's super open again. So play with that. But yeah, that's this D part handled. Once again, in this tutorial, I only wanted to talk about movement. But if you want to learn about how to write strings that sound realistic, how to give more warmness to your track, how to get a more full and huge and more powerful orchestration and all those things, I highly recommend you, if you're new, to check out the rest of this tutorial channel, because there must be hundreds of videos right now talking about every different aspect of orchestration. You might find that in some videos I talk about some of the things I talked about here, and that's because so many pieces of knowledge overlap, and I really want you guys to internalize as much knowledge as possible, because the more you learn, the more professional your music is going to sound. It's not like you learn one thing and you go from 0 to 100. It's like you learn 100 things and you go from 0 to 100. So what I would recommend you to do is, check out the rest of the tutorials if you want to get a super huge and very well-organized guide as to unlocking the professional orchestral sound. The Avalon course, Cinematic Music from Idea to Finished Recording, is one course I took myself back in the day when it was less than half of what it is now. And it taught me so much about orchestration. So that course can be accessed down below in the description of this video. I highly recommend it to you because I took it first, and it was amazing. Anyway, with all of that said and done, if you don't want to let this hour that you spent watching this tutorial go to waste, what I recommend you to do straight away is to sit down in front of your DAW next time you compose and write a track which is like 2 minutes long. Use simple motifs, simple melodies, but try to write this track that has lots of movement in it and doesn't bore the listener to death. That's the goal. Try to do that. If you manage to do that, it means that I did a good job in this tutorial and that you learned what I explained. What you can do also is to join us on Discord on the server I created and send us your track in the feedback section of the Discord server, where you'll find 400 other composers who are always out to give advice and who share their tracks as well and need your advice. So you can feel free to join us on Discord, link down below. It's a free community I created to create this environment where everyone helps each other. So just say, hey, I watched the tutorial about Thor from Alex, and I tried to write this track that with the goal of not making it sound not repetitive and making it have movement. And we're going to see what other people are going to say. And as the last thing, again, if you want, you can download the stems, which means the audio files of every instrument, in the description of this video. And do subscribe and share this video with your friends. Send me some comments if you have questions, you have something to add to what I said, if you have some advices to create interesting bass lines, that would be something I'd be very interested in. And that's all for this video. I'll see you next week with new tutorials, because I try always to keep it up on a regular basis with posting tutorials weekly. So yeah, see you next time with a new video, and join us on Discord. Bye bye.